Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Ali, and this is episode 2 of Taylor Swift 101. So let's get right into it. As a refresher, in episode 1 we covered her impact on the industry. Today I will be exploring every single Taylor Swift album, and make sure you stay tuned till the end for 2 that you might not know about. As you probably know, my biggest joy is making unnecessarily in-depth deep dives into albums and songs, and that will very much continue if you would like it to, but today I'm challenging myself to kind of give a broad overview, and I wanted to create something that could exist on its own, kind of chronicling her entire career. So I really hope this can be helpful for new fans and fun for older fans, because I'm sort of setting myself some questions and then answering them, and I would love to hear your take on those. For each album today, I'm going to explain what I believe to be key songs, as well as key themes, era-defining pop culture moment for each album, and just as something fun and controversial for long-term fans, I will provide one song from each album that if I had to, I would skip. As always, I want to hear your own answers to these questions, so you can only judge me if you are brave enough to share your answers. Whether you are an old fan, a brand new fan, or somewhere in between, I'm so happy to have you here, and I would love to hear if there is an album or song in particular that made you a fan, which one was it and why. I've also made and linked below a playlist of videos that I think are helpful, instrumental, fun to someone's journey in becoming a Swiftie or just learning more. This might be iconic or funny moments, historical performances, interviews, inside jokes, and more. And if any of these videos aren't available to you, you can use Surfshark VPN, who have kindly sponsored today's episode. You guys know I use Surfshark throughout the entire year to access all of my favorite shows and movies online, but they also unblock YouTube videos that are unavailable due to geographical restrictions. For example, sometimes countries outside of the US can't watch awards shows, so if you're wanting to watch the Grammys in February, Surfshark is your new best friend. You might even want to spend New Year's Day with Reputation, because I've heard a rumor that the concert tour movie is coming back to Netflix, and obviously beyond helping me access all of my media favorites, Surfshark also keeps you safe online, which in today's digital age is so vital. We have basically everything about us online, so let Surfshark protect you. Right now they have a limited offer. It's always great value, but the holiday pricing is truly exceptional. Go to surfshark.com/Sheehan for 4 extra months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. Take advantage of that unbeatable pricing now and enjoy all of the content you want over the holiday period. Thank you again so much, Surfshark, for sponsoring this episode, and let's get into it. We of course begin with the album Taylor Swift. This is also known as self-titled or debut, but I'm trying to get into the habit of calling it Taylor Swift because that is what Taylor herself calls it, and I think it's how she wants us to refer to the upcoming Taylor's version. By the way, if you guys would like to see me do like deep dives for Reputation and Taylor Swift before they come out next year, give this video a like to let me know, because I would definitely enjoy that. So let me set the scene. The year is 2006. High School Musical is taking over the world, at least my world anyway. Nick and Miley are in love. The first ever tweet was posted, and country music is largely dominated by older men. Well, along comes Taylor Allison Swift, who is not only not a man, but a young teenage girl.
My name is Taylor Swift. I'm 16 years old, and I want to be a country music recording artist.
Before you know it, we are hearing teen angst right out of a young girl's diary. This album very much has a young woman's voice, both lyrically and vocally. She was telling stories of a teenage girl, and she sounded like one.
On the phone, and he talks real slow, 'cause it's late and his mama don't know.
I really love here that Taylor allowed herself to wallow in heartbreak, to be messy and angry, and to even be petty in a way that only teenage girls really can.
You're just another picture to burn.
There was a narrative that grew quite popular around her 3rd or 4th album that Taylor Swift only writes about heartbreak or ex-boyfriends or love, as if that's not what every singer-songwriter does, but I digress. I could present to you her entire catalogue, but for starters, I will show you this album. You will notice there are songs even here on her very first album, the very first thing that she ever showed the world about herself. There are songs that have nothing to do with her romantic life.
I'm just a girl trying to find a place in this world.
There's The Outside, a song about feeling like she would never fit in. There's Tied Together with a Smile, inspired by a friend's struggles with an eating disorder. Or one of my personal favorites, Mary's Song, inspired by the beautiful life of her next door neighbors.
I'll be 87, you'll be 89. I'll still look at you like like the stars that shine.
All of these songs were written from as young as age 12 and released when she was just 16. This was by far one of the most exciting and interesting things about Taylor at this point. Not only her age, but the fact that she was writing her own songs meant we were hearing a perspective that just wasn't really being heard in the music industry, especially on country radio.
Never gotten married or had a kid. I'm not going to write songs about that.
Right.
But I will write about what I have been through or what my friends have been through.
He stands there and walks away, my God, if I could only say I'm holding every breath for you.
These diaristic songs that Taylor was writing were inspired by Leanne Rimes, Shania Twain, and the Chicks. Taylor very much enjoyed the storytelling element of country music, and that is something that even since she's strayed from that genre has very much remained a cornerstone in her art. And fun fact, Taylor was the very first female country artist to ever write or co-write every single song on a debut country platinum album. Right out the gate, she started with a bang. I'm gonna say the key themes on this album are trucks,
He let her drive the truck. He never let me drive the truck.
God, tears, faded blue jeans, and figuring out who you are. The key songs that I think are the most recognizable from this album would be Tim McGraw, Teardrops on My Guitar, Should Have Said No, Picture to Burn, and the song that made me a fan, Our Song.
Our song is a slam of screen doors, sleeping out late, knocking on your window when we're on the phone and you talk real slow. And it's late cause your mama don't know. I love that song, honey.
This was the first song I ever heard by Taylor. I was just captivated by the storytelling of it, and she's had a hold on me ever since. While I do think that her own name was the perfect title for this debut album, I would love to hear if you guys were forcing her to pick a different name, what would you choose? Personally, I think I would go with Teardrops on My Guitar because that does kind of represent well what she does and what the album is, but it might send too much of a sad idea of this record, which it just isn't totally. So maybe The Outside. Okay, the skip, this was really hard for me, which shows you how much I love this album. I think Stay Beautiful is just my least played song from this. However, this is the vault that I'm most excited to hear overall, and I have a full video on that covering all of the unreleased songs from this time, so I will leave that down below if you haven't seen it. Now, to me, the pop culture moment for this album and this era that comes to mind is Taylor singing Tim McGraw and then introducing herself to Tim McGraw.
Hi, I'm Taylor.
The confidence that she had, even from such a young age, I think is just proof that she was always destined to be a star. Okay, next up we have Fearless. It's 2008. Twilight is taking over the world, Nick is now dating Selena, and Facebook is taking over from MySpace. This album is really about being one of the most powerful things in the world, a teenage girl. Truly, this was the soundtrack to teenage girls' lives. Fearless just perfectly encapsulated so many feelings, experiences, and daydreams that we all had between the ages of 15 to 18. Because Taylor's lyrics are so specific, I mean, she's putting her friends' and boyfriends' names in the songs.
Drew looks at me. Hey Steven, I've been holding back this feeling, so I got some things to say to you. You sit in class next to a redhead named Abigail.
You might think that that makes them less relatable or accessible than songs that have more vague lyricism, but for some reason it's these specific details that helped us really connect with Taylor the most. To Taylor's target demographic, which was essentially her peers, this album was our Bible. I truly think this was the only album I really listened to or needed for like a good 2 years there, because it just told every story that I needed to hear. And even for people like me who are quite a bit younger than Taylor and had not lived these experiences that Taylor was singing about, like falling in love, going through a breakup, that storytelling excellence paired with incredible pop hooks were enough to make me completely obsessed. Fearless perfectly captured the voice of a generation, and I think filled a gap that we were missing. Like I said for debut, a voice this young in country music just hit different. With Taylor's big ball gowns and the lyrics on these songs, a lot of this album and era feels fairy tale-like. But Taylor herself goes on to shatter this illusion on White Horse. She sings, "I'm not a princess, this ain't a fairy tale," showing that she had her feet on the ground but still felt free to dream a little bit. And why shouldn't we? As you'll probably know, many artists suffer from what is known as the sophomore slump, unable to top their debut album. Taylor here did the exact opposite of that. Fearless not only won Best Country Album, but also Album of the Year at the Grammys.
And the Grammy goes to Taylor Swift. Nathan Chapman and Taylor Swift.
Featured artist, Colby Calais.
Against I'm Sasha Fierce and the Fame Monster.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
She was the youngest at the time to win this, and I think has only been passed by Billie Eilish. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, was the best-selling album of 2009, and is still to this day the most awarded country album of all time. And I really think the biggest part of Taylor's appeal, besides her incredible songwriting, was her relatability. 2008 to like 2012 was really peak not like other girls culture. So I think Taylor's self-awareness and girl next door kind of mentality really resonated with any of us that felt like a bit of an outsider. She felt like she could be your friend or your sister, especially because Taylor was making vlogs during this time, you know, showing us things like being silly with her friends or losing her retainer. This didn't feel like an inaccessible pop star like Britney Spears, but rather one of your classmates that was just starting to make it big. And that was definitely part of her charm that made her so likable. This period also saw Taylor's first relationship with another celebrity.
Taylor was reportedly dating Joe Jonas.
Yeah.
So you were dating.
Yeah.
And how do you make it through and past something that was so difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about it, and I like to write about my life. And as my life changes and things happen, I write about it. That's just how I deal with things. And it's been tough, and you just have to try to realize that someday you'll find someone that's right for you.
Overall, Fearless was by far her breakout era. To me, the key songs are definitely Love Story, You Belong With Me, White Horse, 15, and Fearless. My other personal faves include Hey Stephen, Tell Me Why, and Forever and Always. But my god, Fearless is just that song. I think if I had Spotify Wrapped on like my iPod Shuffle back in the day, that would have been number 1 for a good few years. Now my skip, I think I'm gonna have to go with Forever and Always piano version. My favorite part of that song is just the anger and rage that you feel, so I don't really need a stripped back version. Thank you. To me, the key themes on Fearless are Rain, Tuesdays, and 2 a.m.s. As for the pop culture moment that defined this era, I don't think anyone would disagree with me. I mean, you should guess before I say each of these, but surely it is the 2009 VMAs. Taylor was accepting an award on stage when she was very rudely interrupted by a member of the crowd who had decided it was very important that everyone heard who he thought should have won instead.
Best female video goes to Taylor Swift.
I always dreamed about what it would be like to maybe win one of these someday, but I never actually thought that would happen.
I'm really happy for you. I'm gonna let you finish. But Beyonce had one of the best videos of all time.
To this day, I still don't really know why. It's honestly weird to think about what a different timeline of the world we might live in had that never happened. Taylor was obviously very much already in the public's consciousness, so anyone that claims that they made her famous at this time is sadly mistaken. But my honorary mention for pop culture moment goes to her SNL monologue song. Taylor was one of the only hosts to entirely write her own speech, which was of course a song.
Whenever I'm feeling strong emotions about something like this, I usually write a song about it.
I like writing songs about douchebags who cheat on me, but I'm not gonna say that in my monologue.
In this, Taylor poked fun at some of her rumored romances.
You might think I'd bring up Joe, that guy who broke up with me on the phone, but I'm not gonna mention him. And if you're wondering if I might be dating the werewolf from Twilight.
This kind of tongue-in-cheek self-awareness is what made her so fun to follow. Okay, up next we have Speak Now. So, it's 2010. We've got Lady Gaga in the meat dress, Kesha invented TikTok, the world was infected with Bieber fever, Glee was happening, shout out to my fellow Gleeks, Lost was ending, and One Direction was formed. This album had the most impressive writing team of all time, pictured here. That's right, it was just Taylor. This album was entirely self-written with no outside help in response to critics doubting her age and talent, spreading the rumor that she couldn't possibly be pulling her weight in those writing room sessions, despite Liz Rose, her main co-writer on the previous 2 albums, saying that Taylor's sessions were the easiest and Liz felt like she was mostly just fine-tuning teenage Taylor's work.
On this album, I wrote everything by myself, just found myself getting inspired to write songs at 4 in the morning or in the middle of a conversation or while I was on tour in Arkansas and there's no one to call to say, hey, you want to write this with me? So I just wrote all the songs by myself.
Well, Speak Now was her gotcha, and also her first album to sell over 1 million copies in its first week. That fact alone makes me so sad that this album isn't more appreciated because on paper, it actually did better than Fearless. Numbers wise, this was a huge success. Personally, you guys probably know I will always ride for this album album, and I just wish it got a bit more love. On this album, Taylor is kind of reflecting on some final moments of girlhood and first moments of adulthood. Now, Speak Now was originally going to be titled Enchanted, but Scott Borchetta, remember him from episode 1, proposed that might just sound a little bit too childish and not really represent what Speak Now stood for. And to be honest, I completely agree with him. This album is all about having the courage to stand up and speak what is on your mind, no matter how terrifying that might be. Really a great evolution from Fearless, if you think about it. So instead, the title track became Speak Now, a song about interrupting a wedding inspired by her friend Hayley Williams, who would later go on to feature on a Taylor's Version Vault track.
I've always been really fascinated by that moment and how the drama of it right before the vows is somebody gonna burst through the doors. And today, I am.
Now, my personal favorite thing about this album is definitely the sound. It's got more rock than Fearless, but also still twangs of country.
Drunk and grumbling on about how I can't say.
So for me, it's just the perfect trifecta of pop, country, and rock. Sonically, this is kind of just my perfect Taylor album, hence why I love songs like Would've, Could've, Should've and So High School so much. And again, I mean, my previous video was about movie musicals. This album sounds a little bit theatrical, especially in songs like Haunted, which is a little bit gothic, or The Story of Us, which just, I mean, it rocks so hard. And is also perfectly referential on songs like Dear John, where she mimics John Mayer's signature guitar. Speak Now is confessional, vulnerable, and scathing. As deeply as I love Better Than Revenge, a somewhat petty but very fun song about the girl that your ex moved on to.
It's a song off of the album Speak Now, and it's about a girl who stole my boyfriend, and I got mad, and I wrote a song about it.
Thank you.
I also love that on that same album we have songs like Last Kiss or Back to December. Deeply honest songs about how much you loved someone and maybe what you regret. Taylor's whole vibe at this time was just sheer honesty, and part of that was, well, as she put it, naming names.
Speak Now is the next chapter in my story, and I'm naming names.
So every single song on this album has a muse, and we know who every single one of those people is. I made a very in-depth video explaining each of these songs and what they're about, so I will link that down below as well. But ultimately, this album had the final remnants of her girlhood and wondering what the future might hold. This tour was also just incredible and gave us such fantastic live covers.
I know you guys have a lot of amazing bands from this part of the world.
Did you miss me while you were looking for yourself?
My personal favorites are Drops of Jupiter and Betty Davis Eyes. I think the key themes of Speak Now are confession, vintage dresses, and 32-year-old men being menaces. The essential songs are Sparks Fly, Mine, Dear John, Enchanted, Long Live, The Story of Us, and Mean. Now, the skip that you are forcing me to say is probably innocent. I think I explained this in my ranking every Taylor song video, but I just find it hard to listen to with everything that has happened since then. How kind and forgiving Taylor was to someone that hurt her then and would go on to continuously do worse things. It's a tough listen. The pop culture moment for me during Speak Now was Taylor's acting era.
Try it on now then.
A little uncomfortable taking my shirt off in public. I'll wear it later, okay?
After a very fun role on CSI, Taylor hit the big screen with her role in Valentine's Day, starring alongside Taylor Lautner, and would eventually go on to write songs for the Hunger Games soundtrack, as well as her roles in things like The Giver and The Lorax, and Cats. Also in 2011, Taylor was on a Vogue photo shoot where they wanted to give her clip-in bangs, and she said, "Look, it's Vogue, you guys can do whatever you want to do."
It was a pretty interesting morning because they were like, we're thinking we're gonna do like maybe bangs, maybe like some extensions. I'm like, you know what? Just cut it. This is Vogue. Why not?
So they actually cut her hair, they gave her bangs, and the world would never be the same. Again, I would love to hear all of your answers for these things down below. Next up we have Red. Now it is 2012. Hipster culture is in full swing. Instagram photos look like this, and Taylor is trying something a little different. Red was a hybrid of experimental sounds. Suddenly all on one album we have kind of country, kind of pop, kind of dubstep.
Now I'm lying on the cold hard ground.
I remember However, someone recently asked me on Instagram, was I really shocked or surprised when I heard, I don't know if it was Reputation or Lover for the first time, but none of these albums really surprised me. Hearing Red for the first time, I can so clearly picture it. I was in my best friend's car, we put the CD in, and hearing these songs, I was like, wait, what? This album is a fan favorite for great reason, and I would say a clear favorite of Taylor's too, but famously said by many critics to be not sonically cohesive due to aforementioned genre crossovers. Taylor was having fun experimenting with different sounds and working with different producers. Previously, I think Taylor felt very at home with my beloved Nathan Chapman, but here Taylor starts working with Max Martin and Shellback for the first time. This album is also home to the famous All Too Well, a song that was said to be originally around 10 minutes, and after a decade of fans pestering Taylor, we finally got it. Again, I think I covered this in episode 1, but it was just such a win for the Swifties. Now, the media and public slut-shaming definitely intensified around this era.
When was it hardest? When was it toughest for you?
When I was like 23 and people were just like kind of reducing me to kind of making slideshows of like my dating life and putting people in there that I'd sat next to at a party once and taking something that everyone in their darkest moments loves to do, which is to slut shame. I can see a headline about a young artist, about a young female artist, about like another breakup, and it sends me into
It takes you back there to a degree?
It sends me into a real sad place because I don't want that to keep happening.
You know what, Taylor Swift, you stay away from Michael J. Fox's son.
I guess when I see someone else going through like a press thing, like if someone's like beating up on someone in the press, I just like immediately get really sad, like because I know that's probably like blown out of proportion.
This album changed the course of Taylor's career, not once but twice, as it was initially the first time she would experiment with genre switching and dipping her toes into pop. It was also the catalyst for the music industry viewing Taylor as maybe not just a young girl but a serious artist, although I think you can definitely be both. The re-recorded version, as we discussed in episode 1, exploded Taylor's popularity to be even more mainstream. The fandom reached astronomical heights, which then went on to see her record-breaking numbers for Midnights and set up the overwhelming success of the Eras tour. Okay, so thematically, Red at its core is a heartbreak album. Taylor considers this, or at least did at the time, her one true heartbreak album, written after experiencing her first real true adult heartbreak. And while there are songs on there that cover things like when a relationship feels great, or meeting someone new, or even her parents' divorce, that devastating heartbreak really is woven throughout a lot of these songs. Even the upbeat song 22, which every single girl plays at her birthday, is a response to heartbreak. The track The Moment I Knew talks about her 21st birthday when her boyfriend didn't show up, and the fact that this was such a devastating and sad birthday for Taylor, which, as we hear on the previous track All Too Well, is meant to be fun.
Turning 21.
Taylor, in response to that, decides to write 22, which allowed not only her, but also all of her fans to make this an iconic birthday as well. Now, it's kind of been rebranded in the Taylor's version as like a cozy autumnal aesthetic to match the All Too Well short film, but originally this was much more of a summery hipster explosion. This was also when I would say Taylor really became known for her bangs and her red lipstick. I think the key songs are All Too Well in every iteration, I Knew You Were Trouble, We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, and 22. But my personal favorites are Holy Ground, Treacherous, Red, and Starlight. Okay, for skips, this was once again so hard. It's almost like I'm a big fan. But I have to say, I don't think I've once in my life pressed a deliberate play on the song I Knew You Were Trouble. And I really think the goat meme ruined that for me. So... Sorry. The pop culture moment that defined this for me, beyond the bangs and the red lipstick, has to be the slut shaming. And obviously this was not something that Taylor did herself, but just the amount of disgusting conversation that was being had at this time. I think it also shows kind of where we are at societally with that as a concept, but Taylor was really facing the brunt of it. During this time, Taylor faced a lot of hate from One Direction fans that didn't respect or like the fact that she was dating Harry. But even more than that, grown adults in the media and just in general really ramped up their critique of Taylor dating too much, and that kind of became the whole caricature of how they saw her. Okay, next we have 1989. So it's 2014, YA adaptations like The Hunger Games and Divergent were taking over. This Oscars selfie happened. We all had that U2 album put on our phones automatically, and we heard the Gone Girl Cool speech for the very first time. It was now that Taylor did the bravest and most iconic thing that any woman can do. Embrace being single, chopped off her hair, and moved to New York. 1989 was a full pop pivot, and as Taylor herself sings, it's a new soundtrack. If Red was her transitional cocoon of experimentation, Reputation. 1989 is the butterfly emerging, spreading its wings and saying, this is the new me. She had completed her, to use a word invented by Hilary Duff, metamorphosis. Inspired by Taylor's year of birth and the sounds of that era, we have a lot of 80s synth made with collaborators who absolutely excel at that sound. Jack Antonoff, Max Martin, Shellback, and Ryan Tedder. This is what I would call Taylor's first fully grown-up adult era. During this, she moved to New York, embraced being single, celebrated spending time with her girlfriends, and committed to making fully pop hits. Her label, by the way, was terrified by this. They actually begged her to just put 1 or 2 country songs on there. She said, nope, sorry, the world needs a pop Bible, and that's what I'm gonna give them. And thank God she did, because 1989 earned Taylor her 2nd Album of the Year win at the Grammys. I believe this made Taylor the first ever woman to achieve that, which is crazy because, spoiler alert, she would go on to win it 2 more times. The 1989 tour was also not only wildly successful, grossing $250 million, but also was just incredibly iconic. For lack of a better term, 1989 Taylor was just that bitch. When I was staying with my friend who inspired me to make this series, I was telling her about these albums and just raving about 1989, how sonically cohesive it is, how it was just smash hit after smash hit. Obviously I was singing its praises, and so naturally she said, wow, like this must be your favorite album. And I was like, oh, no, it's not even in my top 3, like, but that's how good Taylor is. She can have an album that you recognize as a 10 out of 10, A++, and yet there are still albums she's made that are even closer to your heart. This isn't my favorite, but it's obviously still a perfect album. Publicly at this time, there was a feud with Katy Perry, who Selena went on to play in the Bad Blood music video. The media did something that the media never does, which was pit 2 women against each other. Just kidding, Taylor's oldest time. But ultimately, 1989 tells a story in chronological order of one relationship. Taylor herself has confirmed this, and I in fact have 2 in-depth videos because one just wasn't enough, apparently, breaking down not only this era, but also this album and what each song is about. I would say the key themes here are New York, sisterhood, crop tops, total world domination, and Harry Styles. 1989's key songs are, I mean, I have to say, Shake It Off, Blank Space, Out of the Woods, Style, and Bad Blood. My personal favorites are probably Wonderland and Clean, and the skip would have to be Bad Blood. But you all knew that was coming. Our pop culture moment, I have to say, it's just Taylor becoming the unofficial and then also official ambassador of New York.
Hey, I'm Taylor.
Welcome to New York. Another very little known fact. Did anyone know that I love New York City?
And he said, welcome to New York.
Be like walking down the street in New York, I'd be like, I'm going to get my groceries in New York because I'm just a girl in a big city.
Strutting the streets daily, sometimes multiple times daily, in iconic outfits, celebrating female friendship rather than dating. Even if this was kind of forced in response to the way that everyone was obsessing over who she was dating, it seemed like this was a very nice, close time that Taylor had with her friends, which I think is a pretty key theme for women in our 20s. Also, the 1989 World Tour had just the most iconic special guests.
LA, make some noise for Mary J. Blige. I made it to the end.
Let me know who your favorite special guest was. Also, I have to mention Becky, which was born from this Tumblr post, and then Taylor made it into a t-shirt and wore it out in the streets. I love the Tumblr era. Next up we have Reputation. So, it is the year 2017, Riverdale was happening, Despacito took the world by storm. Honestly, this was kind of a tough year for pop culture. I'm struggling to think of iconic things. Really, the world was just making space for Reputation. Prior to this, Taylor had released a brand new album every 2 years like clockwork, but in 2016 broke that pattern. In the wake of Kanye publicly calling Taylor a liar and a snake, the public fell out of love with Taylor, pretty much turned on her overnight, and as a result, no one physically saw her for a year. Taylor wiped her social media completely clean, and a mural was put up declaring her dead. This is always such a hard time for me to like reflect on, because obviously I was a fan at the time, so it was sad for me to see how she was treated, but even more so now, looking back and knowing just how bad it was.
Taylor Swift is over party was the #1 trend on Twitter worldwide. Do you know how many people have to be tweeting that they hate you for that to happen?
Just feels like it's more than music now at this point. It just gets loud sometimes.
Again, I feel like I say this anytime I talk about it, but I don't know mentally how you can survive seemingly the entire world saying they wished you would disappear. Like, I can't believe that that is something someone has endured. Multiple people have endured, but I don't know. I think it gets downplayed a lot. People say they're a celebrity, they'll be fine, as if money protects our mental health. Anyway, that's a big conversation that we can have another day, but out of this, Reputation was born. Now, people love to remember Reputation as just this purely bad bitch era with like black outfits, snake motif, snarling lyrics, and a vengeful attitude, which partly is true, but there is another half of this album that is often overlooked. You know, in reality, it's a dual theme. Reputation at its core, at least to me, is a love album. It's just wrapped in a hard shell exterior. Publicly, Taylor had lost everything, her previously good name, the world's support, but privately, she was falling in love. My babies feel like to be loved in a time when, again, it feels like everyone is against you, everyone wants you to disappear. I just think that is a different kind of support, and you can understand how much that person would mean to you. As she said, my reputation's never been worse, so he must like me for me. Now, on August 21st, there was a solar eclipse, which you think would be the biggest news story of that day, but it very much got overshadowed or eclipsed by Taylor posting this video to her social media. Taylor did zero press for this album, choosing to instead let it speak for itself, which is kind of crazy and unheard of for any kind of album rollout.
I needed to put out that album, and I needed to not explain that album, because another thing about that album was I knew if I did an interview about it, none of it would be about music.
And despite this, it became the fastest selling album to reach the #1 spot on US iTunes, only 6 minutes after its release, which is extra fun because it was her 6th studio album. Now, I will confess, when I first heard Look What You Made Me Do, the lead single, I was confused, to say the least. It was a massive departure from the Taylor we previously knew and loved. And while I sometimes think Taylor has a bad habit of choosing the wrong lead singles, which really you can't say wrong because that's subjective, but I do think this packed a punch and made people pay attention. It might have been a little bit of a red herring, but it also addressed the main thing that people were associating Taylor with at that time, which was the Kanye thing. I also think that this was an era, maybe since Fearless, that Taylor gained the most new fans. A lot of people that I knew even in real life who had hated her previously were suddenly giving her a chance, and that is the power of a good comeback. If anyone out there didn't get to witness the Reputation Stadium tour, I'm so sorry. It was truly a phenomenal time to be alive, and again, hopefully Netflix puts that back up. The key songs for Rep are definitely Look What You Made Me Do, Don't Blame Me, Ready For It, Gorgeous, and Getaway Car. I think, am I missing something? I guess Delicate was a single, but yeah. Key themes, I would say snakes, rebirth, British men, bars, and sex. I always laugh when I think about the idea of like Scott Swift hearing Dress for the first time, or hearing that in front of Swifties in a secret session. Taylor was definitely growing up. As for pop culture moments, I'm hard pressed to think of anything more iconic than the Look What You Made Me Do music video. You know, it addresses all the media scrutiny, it was packed full of Easter eggs.
But not for me, all I think about is karma.
And it just went insanely viral. Taylor has said to this day, I think, that there are still things in that video that we have not decoded. Whether I believe that or it's just a very smart marketing technique, who's to say? This is an album that I have a lot to say about, so I'm very excited to hear Taylor's version next year. All right, well, next up we have Lover. It is now 2019, Old Town Road is taking over every single radio station. Fire Festival happened, and that incredibly talented woman in the London Underground sang Shallow.
I'm off the deep end, watch as I dive in.
As a prophet once said, after a hurricane comes a rainbow. And to me, that kind of really represents the switch from Reputation to Lover. After the aesthetic darkness that was Reputation, Taylor fully switched gears, was loving life, and this album reflected that. This album covers love in all forms: romantic, familial, grieving, which, as another wise prophet said, is just love persevering. Honestly, that quote changed my life. And also love in the form of activism and allyship. Taylor utilized her platform and her voice a lot during this time, specifically to speak up about LGBTQIA rights, as well as the US presidential and local elections. This was something that pretty much everyone in Taylor's camp advised her not to do, and did in fact have like some of a negative backlash. A lot of the general public just kind of wanted her to keep her mouth shut, and even some fans didn't appreciate this. So one of Taylor's friends, Todrick Hall, had said to her, "What would you do if you had a kid one day and they were gay?" And she was like, "What do you mean? I would just have a kid and they would be gay. Like, what do you mean?" And in this moment, she realized that she hadn't really made her stance around queer rights or queer people in general clear enough, which seems very silly to me because she had always been quite outspoken of queer rights. I mean, we have Welcome to New York.
I wrote the song kind of following the when gay marriage became legal in New York. So many of my friends had to be kind of scrutinized for who they were in love with, you know, from the time they came out. And I just, you know, I didn't want to make a big deal of it because I don't think it should be a big deal who you love.
We still have so far to go in terms of equality and protections for LGBTQ people and people in the trans community. I got my census the other day and there were 2 choices for gender. There was male and female. And that erasure was so upsetting to me, the erasure of transgender and non-binary people. And when you don't collect information on a group of people, that means that you have every excuse in the world not to support them. We need to make sure that we elect people who care about all communities.
She's always been quite a vocal ally for the queer community, but I think since this album was celebrating love in all forms, this was a great opportunity to make sure that everybody felt included. Now, Lover was the first of all of these albums I've mentioned that was recorded with her brand new record label, meaning she owns it herself. So this album, nor any of the ones that will come after it, need to be re-recorded. And we covered all of this in episode 1 about the whole Taylor's version journey, why she's doing it, what's happening, what's next. So if you missed that, episode 1 will be below. While Reputation felt definitely authentically Taylor, it was a direct response to how the world was treating her, at least half of it, as we discussed. Whereas Lover felt to me like a real return to just Taylor at her core, loving sparkly, shiny things, country music. She included some of her musical idols on here, like the Chicks and Brendan Urie. She was back to her old, optimistic pop star ways. Proof that, in fact, maybe the old Taylor was not dead after all. In the album's prologue, she wrote, "I've decided that in this life, I want to be defined by the things that I love, not the things that I hate, not the things that I'm afraid of, or the things that haunt me in the middle of the night. Those things may be my struggles, but they're not my identity." And I just really love that as a notion, the fact that this album just really represents celebration of self, of others, of love. I feel like of all of her albums, Lover is one that we've maybe talked about the least on this channel. And I don't know why that is. Maybe because the era got a little bit shortened by the pandemic and what came next. But yeah, I don't say enough good things about Lover. Now, I don't know if other fans would necessarily agree with this, but I would actually call Lover quite sonically incohesive, only I mean that in a good way. Like, again, I've mentioned I don't have a problem with the fact that Red has a bunch of different sounds on it, and I really appreciate that in Lover as well. I think the variety of sounds explored on this album make it really interesting and means there's something for everyone. Whether you like dreamy pop, 80s synth, or jazz, there is something for everyone. As far as key songs, we have to mention Me. This was the first song that Taylor ever owned. I do feel a little bit sad that this wasn't included in the Eras tour, given it was the first song she ever owned and it's a celebration of her.
Like, I just want like little kids to be like, there's no one like me. Like,
You're the only one in me. Baby, that's what I you. I promise that nobody's gonna love you like me. Oh my God, Leo, you are singing this so loud.
We obviously also have You Need to Calm Down, The Man, The Archer, Cornelia Street, Death by a Thousand Cuts, and a little indie underground song called Cruel Summer. It is truly so sad that Taylor didn't make Cruel Summer the lead single for this album. That would have changed the trajectory of my life. We may not have even had a pandemic. My personal favorites, if you were wondering, are Death by a Thousand Cuts and Cornelia Street. But also this one line from The Man.
When everyone believes ya, what's that like?
When you think about that, there's just something about that line that gets me. Our key themes on Lover are love, loss, alcohol, and queer rights. Okay, my skip, Naturally, Soon You'll Get Better, is a song that I have never been able to listen to and I don't think ever will, but I don't think that's fair to call it a skip. So I'm gonna have to say it's nice to have a friend. I'm so sorry. But yeah, let me know yours. And for our Lover Pop Culture moment, even though this had nothing to do with the album, for me it is the fact that this is when Taylor shared with us that she would be embarking on her re-recording journey.
You're planning on re-recording some of your music.
Yeah, that's true, and it's something that I'm very excited about doing because my contract says that starting November 2020, so next year, I can record albums 1 through 5 all over again. I think that artists deserve to own their work. I just feel very passionately about that.
This is when she sort of announced to the world everything she had been going through and what she was going to do next. And that really kickstarted so much of what we have got to celebrate in the past 5 or 6 years since then. Also, definitely Taylor and Katy Perry hugging and retiring their feud. And now we have Folklore. And I know you don't need me to tell you what was happening in the world in 2020. If we thought 1989 into Reputation was a pivot, Lover into Folklore was like tilting the world on its axis. This was just never been done before. And the best part of all is that she had posted a photo of herself the day she started working on this album, captioned, "Not a lot going on at the moment. If you're a newer fan," is a reference to a t-shirt she wore in a music video in the Red era, the original Red era. So as fans, naturally, this is why we have trust issues, because there was in fact a lot going on at the moment.
Okay, so it is 8:30 in the morning, and why am I awake, you ask? Well, I sort of unexpectedly started writing the new album, and at that point I was just like, I'm just writing songs in quarantine, and then it just became an album really quickly. I'm very excited about it.
While we were all baking bread or playing really sad Zoom trivia at home, Taylor was casually creating the greatest album of all time. Now, this came out in dead winter for me here in the Southern Hemisphere, but for a lot of people, this is a real summery escape. With songs like August, I understand. Most artists would not have dared to release an album during this time, at least not intentionally, because without the ability to promote and tour an album, really it's not going to be successful. But our girl Taylor created this from a place of catharsis and just decided to gift it to us anyway. This was recorded entirely remotely with each different producer and collaborator completely isolated. I remember Taylor in an interview saying that she and Bon Iver, who created songs for this album, still to this day had never met, which is crazy to think about, the way that we can create music these days. This was recorded entirely remotely from each different producer and collaborator spaces from all across the country and was kept a total secret to most people, even more than Taylor's regular albums. Initially, Taylor had reached out to Aaron Dessner, an artist that she really looked up to from The National. He responded with some like musical kind of scraps and ideas that he'd been working on, and within hours Taylor had written a full song and sent it back. I truly do not think I will ever forget the moment that I read that caption. It was so late at night here, and obviously I then had to go to sleep and like wait for this album that was coming out pretty much immediately. Also, I made a little list of predictions on Instagram before the album came out, and I think this was pretty close. And even more so hearing it for the first time, every time I press play on the one, I'm just instantly transported back to that time, and it was so exciting. Having something new to look forward to in that time means so much. I don't talk that much about how difficult the pandemic was for me because I know a lot of people probably had it way harder, but with everything that was going on in my personal life, I can't express how grateful I am that Taylor gave us an album during this time. It was just having something to be excited about, to dive into, to get lost in. Yeah, I'll always be really grateful for that. The genre switch was pretty surprising. You know, this is Taylor who started out in country music, had then pivoted to full-on pop, and now once again had made a switch to making an indie folk record. This is where I think we saw another huge influx of new listeners, likely partly due to Bon Iver's presence on this album, and also the fact that, you know, we were all kind of just sitting at home with nothing better to do, so why not tune into this new surprise Taylor Swift album? I also think the fact that it's folk and not pop allowed some people who might look down upon those genres an excuse to tune in. To me, Taylor has always been a phenomenal songwriter, incredibly gifted, but to a lot of people, if that songwriting is packaged in a pop sound, they won't give it the time of day. Country music, pop music, a lot of people look down on that. Now that these songs have a folk backing instead, the whole world finally felt free to pay attention to her talent. Once again, personally, her songwriting has always been this good, it just sounds different. Now, for the first time in Taylor's career, she wrote an album that wasn't entirely diaristic. There are, of course, songs here that are about her personal life, including some that are maybe masquerading as fictitious, but here on Folklore we really got to dive into an album or a story with new characters. Taylor said she had reached a point where she felt like her signature autobiographical writing wouldn't be sustainable forever. You know, anytime she wrote about her life, she's just giving the media fuel to write and speculate about her personal life. So she challenged herself here to write about other people's lives instead. For example, The Last Great American Dynasty chronicles the life of Rebecca Harkness, a philanthropist and socialite, and her scandalous life. The plot twist being that the house Rebecca was living in is the one that Taylor now owns. And once again, this kind of calls back to the songwriting that Taylor was doing from the very beginning, because that is just so classically country music, to have this whole story about this character and then it turns out that this person is this person's kid. Like, that's quintessential country songwriting. So even if she has left that genre, I love that Taylor will always have that with her. Then we have the teenage love triangle told in 3 separate songs, offering different perspectives to one summer fling. First we have Betty, sung from the perspective of James, apologizing to fellow high schooler Betty for leaving her for another girl. August explores the summer memories of that girl that he left Betty for, and Cardigan is Betty looking back on it all.
One of my favorite things about this record is the fact that there's this trilogy of 3, the trinity of Betty, August, and Cardigan. I've written so many songs from a female's perspective of wanting a male apology that we decided to make it from a teenage boy's perspective, apologizing after he loses the love of his life because he's been foolish.
First we have Betty, sung from the perspective of James, apologizing to fellow high schooler Betty for leaving her for another girl. August explores the summer memories of that girl that he left Betty for, and Cardigan is Betty looking back on it all. And fun fact, these are the names of Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' kids who are friends with Taylor. So they have a fun little shout out in this album, and I'm assuming that at some point their 4th kid will also get a mention somewhere. Now, ironically, the most important 2 songs to me are very much about Taylor's life. That would be Mad Woman and My Tears Ricochet.
Mad Woman, I was like, oh, this is female rage. Like, this is a song about female rage. It has to be. Like, I have to figure out how to make this about female rage. And then I was thinking the most rage-provoking element of being a female is the gaslighting that happens when for centuries we've been just expected to absorb male behavior silently. Oftentimes when we respond to bad male behavior or somebody just doing something that was absolutely out of line and we respond, that response is treated like the offense itself.
To me, the whole thing starts with My Tears Ricochet.
Yeah, chronologically, that's the first thing. I wrote that one alone. It's definitely, I think, one of the saddest songs on the album. It's kind of a song about karma.
Yeah.
It's a song about greed. It's a song about somebody could be your best friend and your companion and your most trusted person in your life, and then they could go and become your worst enemy who knows how to hurt you because they were once your most trusted person.
If you go and listen to My Tears Ricochet, actually both of these songs, keep in mind the things that we discussed in episode 1. It just gives me goosebumps. And a great place to learn about all of these songs is definitely the Long Pond studio sessions, where Taylor discusses and performs each of these songs with Jack and Aaron. Taylor won her 3rd Album of the Year Grammy for this album, which tied her with Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon, and Frank Sinatra, but more on that later. I would say the key themes on Folklore are escape, resentment, isolation, feminism, and cottagecore. Quintessential songs is so hard to pick because it's kind of all of them, but My Tears Ricochet, Mad Woman, The Last Great American Dynasty, Mirrorball, Exile, The One, and all of the Teenage Love Triangle. Honestly, the whole album. And the skip, this was genuinely the hardest that I've had to pick for so far. It is just a flawless album. Sadly, I think I have to say Epiphany. Sometimes it is just a little bit too hard to listen to. Now, because this came out in the middle of lockdown, there are not really any pop culture moments I can give to it besides the surprise announcement and drop of this album itself. That was really the best thing about 2020 anyway. But speaking of surprise drops, then we had Evermore. So now it's just 6 months later, we are still in lockdown and very much still marveling at Folklore, and suddenly Taylor graciously gives us an entire sister album. Personally, I see Evermore as a slightly older, more jaded sister. To me, it feels like Folklore kind of deals with breakups, but Evermore is like death and divorce. If Folklore represents stories told like around a campfire in the middle of the woods at night, Evermore is after most of the people have gone to sleep, you've had a couple more drinks, and things are getting way more vulnerable. Here we are still in the forest, forest, we had that same collaboration team, but we are wandering deeper into the woods with a whole host of new stories to explore. Now, this album was born of the fact that Taylor said she simply could not stop writing songs. Her, Jack and Aaron are just this kind of incredible collaborative team where they seem to pump out ideas endlessly, and I think they have a real trust and comfort with each other. So that would really increase one's ability to share, because you're not afraid of, well, what if this isn't good enough? Will they judge me? You can kind of just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. Once again, this just makes me feel so grateful and lucky to have chosen this one little country singer to have become a fan of like 18 years ago, who to this day just loves to create. I'm so well fed. I would really love to hear from you guys what you think the main differences between Folklore and Evermore are, and how you view these two sister albums. Sometimes I think Evermore gets a little bit stuck in Folklore's shadow. The fact that it did come out so close behind it, and that if it had come out maybe a year later, it would have received more love from the industry and maybe also the general public. But also it is just very much like a wintry album, so the timing of that could not be more perfect. There's also just something so freeing about Taylor not following that traditional 2-year album cycle, just saying like, hey, I made something, I like it, here it is. But this was so unconventional. There was no reason that Folklore and Evermore should have been as successful as they were. I don't think anyone else could have pulled this off. I'll never understand how we were able to get Lover, Folklore, Evermore, Fearless TV, Red TV, and then Midnights in such a quick period of time. On Folklore, Taylor had written Epiphany about her late grandfather, and on Evermore, we got a beautiful song, Marjorie, about her grandmother.
One of the hardest forms of regret to sort of work through is the regret of being so young when you lost someone that you didn't have the perspective to learn and appreciate who they were.
Marjorie had also been a singer but didn't get to professionally pursue it. So Taylor included some of her vocals on this track, and not only can we hear it here, but also every single night on the Eras tour, playing to the biggest sold out crowds all around the world.
How did that happen?
My mom found a bunch of her old records, a bunch of old vinyls of her singing opera, and I sent them to Aaron and he added them to the song. And
wow.
So it says, you know, if I didn't know better, I think you were singing to me now. And then you hear Marjorie actually sing, my grandmother.
If I didn't know better, I think you were singing to me now.
On a personal note, this album, and therefore Marjorie, came out the day of my grandmother's funeral. So that song will always just hold such a special place in my heart. And seeing it on tour impacted me a lot more than I expected it would. Initially, I was really surprised that Taylor would include it because I thought that is such a vulnerable and personal moment. And it became one of my favorite memories. Okay, I think Evermore's key songs are Willow, Champagne Problems, Tolerate It, and No Body, No Crime, featuring Haim. Likely for the rhyme. Key themes, I think, would be escapism, isolation, resentment, family, and murder. The skip for Evermore was maybe even harder. I truly don't know. I'm gonna force myself and say maybe Right Where You Left Me, but I think in a couple more years I will appreciate that song better. But let me know what you would pick, because this is really hard. As for pop culture moments, I really don't know. We were still incredibly in lockdown. Evermore didn't get a Long Pond, so maybe once again just the fact that it existed, and the only thing crazier than Taylor dropping a surprise album was doing it again 6 months later. After that craziness, we then have Midnights. It is 2022. Lea Michele has replaced Beanie Feldstein in Funny Girl on Broadway. Don't Worry Darling was a movie that felt like a movie. Bennifer reunited, and this was stuck in my head at all hours of the day.
A Negroni.
I was going to say the same thing.
Magliato. With Prosecco in it.
Oh, stunning.
So Midnights was a concept album that told the stories of 13 sleepless nights scattered throughout Taylor's life, focusing on 5 major themes. We had self-hatred, revenge fantasies, wondering what might have been, falling in love, and falling apart.
It's a concept album, and the main question is what keeps you up at night. So it's, you know, you could be up at night because you're reeling from just having met someone and you're falling for them, or you could be plotting revenge. You could be thinking about what could have been. You know, there's just so many possibilities. If you give that, like, if you think of that as like a creative writing prompt, which is what I did, that's where the album came from.
It's so crazy to think about how long you and I have been talking about Taylor Swift on here, because I remember making videos when we first heard about this, and I was theorizing what the sound might be, what the visuals might look like. I kind of want to see what I got wrong and right, but I think the concept for this album is just so genius because it allows you to delve into feelings or topics or memories that have laid dormant for years, have recently been triggered by the re-recording of those previous albums, or even write about current feelings you are experiencing in that moment without being under too much of a microscope for how that might apply to her relationship at the time. The fact that this was sold to us as sort of a walk down memory lane, the things that keep you up at night, an album of retrospection, if you will, made it a lot harder for anyone to concretely put a timestamp on any of these songs and their possible muses. So Taylor announced Midnights during her acceptance speech at the VMAs, and I will never get over this look. I think this is a top 10, maybe actually no, this is a top 3 Taylor Swift look for me. Also, if you guys would like to see me make a video relating to her style, whether that be street style, red carpet, let me know what you would want it to be, because there's just so much to talk about. Spoiler alert, this was amazing. And I still don't know if I have like fully processed this album. It gave us what I consider to be 2 of the greatest songs of all time. Technically both bonus tracks, but I tend to love a good bonus track. First, we have the glittery gel pen masterpiece that is Hits Different, and the soul-destroying masterpiece that is Would've, Could've, Should've. Now, this album really tackled Taylor's relationship with fame on Anti-Hero, something we had witnessed before on songs like Mirrorball, I Know Places, Blank Space, The Lucky One, Peace, but this really felt like a more vulnerable confession. So I'm really glad that that song had the success that it did. Often Taylor's big like single hits, you know, We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, Shake It Off, tend to be like not really my favorites, but Anti-Hero is one that I'm still not sick of. Now, in a crazy turn of events, I got to hear this album in the Universal Music Australia headquarters inside one of their recording studios with a bunch of you guys, funnily enough. Please let me know if you were there. And during that, one of the employees let us know that before it had even hit midnight, Taylor had smashed every single Spotify record like ever made. It was truly so exciting to be there for that and experience this new album in that way. And I don't say this enough, but thank you guys so much, because it is only because of you and your support and you wanting to have these conversations with me that I've ever been able to do something so cool like that. So thank you so much. For Midnight's themes, I think the ones that Taylor gave us say it all. You know, self-hatred, revenge fantasies, wondering what might have been, falling in love, and falling apart. Pretty much every song on this album can fit into one of those categories. Okay, essential songs. I think we have Anti-Hero, Karma, Bejeweled, Maroon, Would've, Could've, Should've, You're On Your Own Kid, and You're Losing Me. Of course. If a skip, again, Bigger Than the Whole Sky feels unfair, so I think I would have to say Sweet Nothing. Is that controversial? And our pop culture moment, of course, is just world domination. Again, for like the 3rd time. Taylor's career really peaked yet again during the Midnights era with the success of this album and then the announcement of the Eras tour. High demand, which is putting that incredibly lightly, in addition to scalpers and bots, meant that most of the general sale for the Eras tour was just cancelled because everything had sold in pre-sale. The demand for Taylor during this time was unprecedented, literally. And you know, not that Taylor had been our little local small indie artist for a while, but this was really reaching new heights. It felt like the entire world was suddenly a swiftie. But I have to say, I am somewhat intrigued now that the Eras tour is ending, if that will fall off again. It's my prediction that people who kind of got swept up in the excitement of the Eras tour maybe won't stick around as much after this chapter closes. While I do think Taylor has gained a lot of new lifelong fans during this time of all ages, all demographics, at the same time, I think a lot of people were just kind of there for the ride, and that's okay too. And next up we have the Tortured Poets Department. It is February 2024 and Taylor made history at the Grammys twice that night. Not only did she win her historical 4th Grammy for Album of the Year for Midnights, making her the first person in history to do so, but she also announced that she had a brand new album that literally none of us saw coming. Now, I feel like this is really the hardest album for me to summarize in a quick, succinct way because I've just spent the last 8 months talking about it and like going really in depth. If you're new here, I made a 4-part series doing a deep dive on every single song, explaining every Easter egg, reference, callback to her previous work, references to other people's work, as well as ranking the songs and about 10 hours of content. So I apologize if I struggle here to simplify that. To me, I think the main theme of this album is loss. Loss of a relationship, loss of self, loss of innocence or privacy or agency, and also how we respond to loss. I haven't talked about this in this video, but I have this kind of theory that on every Taylor album, there is a song that connects us to the previous album and the upcoming one. For me, You're Losing Me is very much the through line that connects Midnights to the Tortured Poets Department. Funnily enough, well, actually not so funny, You're Losing Me was written in the end of 2021 when Taylor was promoting Red Taylor's version and was released 2 years later, last November, to celebrate the anniversary of Midnights. But to me, this song is truly integral to understanding anything on the Tortured Poets department. Before we heard the songs on TTPD, Taylor needed us to hear the breakdown of the relationship that had been kind of the through line of her previous 5 albums. And the second vital piece of information before hearing the album is the prologue, which if you haven't read that inside the vinyl booklet, I highly recommend. Something I think doesn't get talked about nearly enough is the title and how perfectly it relates to this album. It is truly a collection of references to Tortured Poets. Once again, I go through all of these in my deep dive series, but we have references to Joe from Little Women, Dylan Thomas and Patti Smith, Maddie Healy, J.M. Barrie, Emily Dickinson, Nancy Mitford, Frances Hodgson Burnett, The Iliad by Homer, Shakespeare, Aristotle, Stevie Nicks, etc. That title, while I think it made a great kind of ironic joke in the title song, is also perfectly appropriate for all of the references on this album. I said in my series that my word for this album was catharsis, and I stand by that. So yes, I guess my theme is catharsis, but also, yeah, mania, especially if you read the prologue and also the Troy and Gabriella, Nathan and Haley love story. Key songs I think are But Daddy I Love Him, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, another great discussion of her relationship to fame, Fresh Out the Slammer, one that everyone overlooks and is so good but also so integral to this album, and then also How Did It End, Clara Bow, and The Manuscript. My skip, you can probably guess, I think it's Robin. I'm so sorry, Aaron Dessner, I just don't put it on. You know, I already have Never Grow Up. I don't need this. Curious to hear if you guys have a different skip for Tortured Poets, because I don't know what else it could be. Finally, we are at the 2 bonus albums. First up is Beautiful Eyes. This was a Walmart EP that came out in 2008, containing both an audio CD and a visual DVD. This was sold in a very limited release. Taylor didn't want to overwhelm people and feel like she was putting out too much, so this was just kind of done on the side. In terms of songs, it is mostly remixes or alternative versions of songs, but we also have Beautiful Eyes, the song, and I Heart ?
Love you, Gracie.
Your beautiful eyes stare right into mine,
But I can't believe you made me sit at home, cry like a baby, wait right by the phone every night.
Both of these songs were written in 2003, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of old fans when I say I Heart ? Along with I'd Lie and Permanent Marker were some of the staples on like our iPod touches back then. Both of those songs are technically released because they existed as promotional singles. So I Heart ? Was for a Best Buy commercial, and Beautiful Eyes was used in a promotional deal with 17 magazine. These are quite rare now, so if you ever see one on eBay, get your hands on it. Finally, we have the Taylor Swift Holiday Collection. So this was a Target exclusive in 2007 and then released everywhere else December 2008. It's just crazy how much Taylor was putting out into the world at that time. The hard work has really always been there. So this contains 4 cover songs: Last Christmas, Santa Baby, Silent Night, and White Christmas, and then 2 are original songs she wrote herself: Christmas Must Be Something More and Christmas Is When You Were Mine. They're very young but very fun. Last Christmas charted pretty well, I think, but overall it's not like one of her most known projects. And originally it was titled Sounds of the Season. Now, not to be confused with Christmas Tree Farm, which Taylor wrote, recorded, and released within under 6 days. She wrote it December 1st, 2019, and released it on December 6th.
So the idea I have for the song is Christmas Tree Farm, because I grew up on one. Do you see what I mean? So it would be like, in my heart is a Christmas tree farm, and the people would come, and and all year. My winter's nights are taken up by static. All right, so now we've got amazing singers.
Merry Christmas, I love you.
It's done now. We're gonna put it out. We hope you like our Christmas song.
I think Christmas Tree Farm is a very underrated Christmas song in the zeitgeist, but let me know if you prefer the original or the old-timey version. Well guys, that is all 11 of Taylor Swift's studio albums, plus the 2 EPs, and as you know, as we covered last week, there is also the re-recorded albums. Again, I just feel the need to say how lucky I feel to have chosen a favorite singer that loves creating so much. I really hope that at least one person out there found this video helpful. Again, I just kind of wanted to have a big summary of everything all in one place for new fans or for old fans or honestly anyone, but I just felt like I do so much zooming in on a song or an album. But I wanted to zoom out for a second and to take a look at the journey from start to finish and see how far Taylor has come. Truly such a privilege to watch this journey evolve, seeing her music go from country to pop to indie back to pop, and, or as she put it at my concert, whatever the hell Reputation was. Honestly, it is just such a joy, and even if people aren't Swifties or this isn't for them, I just hope that everybody has an artist or a band or something in their life that brings them as much joy as she does to me. In addition to all of the other questions I've asked you guys today, I would mostly just love to hear which album made you a fan, and also a little bit about yourself. I love reading kind of the different demographics of Swifties or even of my audience. It just makes me so happy that people come from all over the world of all different ages and backgrounds to share this common interest and common joy. So let me know a bit about, you know, your Swiftie testimony. Do let me know what you guys would like to see in future episodes of this series. I'm honestly open to anything, whatever you think would be helpful or interesting to cover, let me know. If you did like this video, make sure to give it a like. It helps me out so much. And also, obviously, if you aren't subscribed, you can fix that down below. Thank you again, Surfshark, for sponsoring this video. I love you guys, and I will see you next time. Bye!
Is this what it feels like to grow up?